or maybe not at all.
Well, hello. Happy Wednesday. There's so many smiling faces, I can barely see with the blinding lights right here. But welcome and good evening. My name is Elaine Arnott, and I'm the president and CEO here at the National Liberty Museum. And I want to welcome you all to what promises to be a fiery, funny, and maybe slightly uncomfortable evening, but that's the way we like it at the NLM. We've brought together a comedian, a culture critic, a free speech advocate, and a libertarian journalist. Okay, I know. Sounds like it's about to be a setup for a pretty controversial punchline. Don't worry, I'm gonna leave that to the comedian to do. I'm not gonna try. But tonight, the real punchline is this. They're all willing to sit on the same stage and actually talk to each other. In our times, that's rare and worth celebrating. This event is a part of our Year of Free Speech, a bold initiative here at the National Liberty Museum to explore tensions, responsibilities, and the power of free speech in a pluralistic democracy. Because at a time when words can get you fired or even famous, we believe it's more important than ever to ask, what does it really mean to speak freely? We're very grateful to the William Penn Foundation for their generous support of this series and their ongoing commitment to civic dialogue and cultural innovation in Philadelphia. Now, while this exhibition is down for the evening to support the program, we hope you'll come back and visit the Let's Talk Confronting What Divides Us. It's a powerful invitation to reflect on tough questions, listen across differences, and engage in conversations that don't always have easy answers. So my action item to you is when you come back, bring a friend, a family member, or maybe even somebody you regularly disagree with. That's where the real work of liberty begins. And now, to help us unpack tonight's conversation about cancel culture, where it comes from, what it means, whether it's a form of justice, censorship, or a little bit of both, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator. Nick Gillespie is editor-at-large at Reason Magazine and host of the Reason Interview. He's known for his sharp wit, intellectual curiosity, and the willingness to explore the uncomfortable terrain from punk rock to politics. He's the perfect person to guide tonight's discussion, so please join me in welcoming Nick Gillespie.
I am also lazy, so I'm going to stay seated. And Ernest, that is yours. I will, before we get started, we're going to talk for about 45 or 50 minutes, then we're going to do audience Q&A. So please pay attention, and, when you get called on, please give a long, sustained argument that has little relevance to what we've been talking about, and then finish with a big statement. But we'll have a lot of time for audience Q&A. And just to follow up on that introduction, which is almost all lies, I'm reminded, are any of you Ozzy Osbourne fans? Okay, so the Black Sabbath frontman who died, and it's fascinating, whenever we're talking about free speech and reputation and things like that, I got a chance to interview Ozzy Osbourne in the 1980s when I was working at a heavy metal magazine. And we always used to ask people at the end of every interview, because we just had like standard things we would ask people and throw together in jumbled articles. And it was always like, do you have a message for your fans? And Ozzy Osbourne, and this was in 1987, so he'd already been through a grinder again and again because his music and Black Sabbath and also his solo music had been accused of driving people insane and pushing kids not only to Satanism, Tipper Gore used to call him out with regularity on this, but to suicide, because he had a song called Suicide Solution. And he gave me a word of advice that I've never understood, but it has stayed with me, which was the message to his fans was, get down, rock and roll. And when I asked him, like, what does that mean, though, sir? And he was like, just get down, rock and roll. and hopefully that's what we're going to do tonight. I don't know what that means, but it seems apropos. Let me introduce our panelists, and I'll start first with Ernest Owens, who is a journalist and is the author of The Case for Cancel Culture. And Ernest, the subtitle of that is How This Democratic Tool Works to Liberate Us All. Next to him is Rikki Schlott, who is
I don't have a book, by the way.
Well, but you do have a book, right? Or
I do have the book, but not physically.
She's a New York Post columnist and also the co-author of The Canceling of the American Mind that she wrote with Greg Lukianoff of Fire, which is headquartered in Philadelphia, if I'm not misremembering. And then we have Dov Davidoff.
Hey, Nick.
Yes, comedian, actor.
Yeah. Actor, yeah.
And you...
Investor, comedian, actor, yeah.
And you wrote a book called
Road
Road Dog,
memoir.
about being a comedian on the road.
Yeah, trying to figure it out, yeah.
Okay, all right. Are you on like a work release program, or did the court mandate that you're here?
Wait, what do you mean?
I don't know. You just seem like you're not
Me?
engaged. Yeah.
No, I'm entirely engaged.
Okay.
This is how I look. You should see me when I'm unengaged.
Okay.
No, I'm completely engaged. I'm just trying to think through, the forum and the process. And no, I'm very engaged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
No,
Okay,
I apologize.
We'll
if I
check
seem
in
that
with
way.
you.
Yeah.
We'll wake you before we leave.
No, I'm in, man. I'm all in.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm all in. I'm keyed in.
Let's start the conversation first with, trying to define cancel culture, because we all kind of know it when we see it, but we all define it differently, and then we might, disagree on what it means. But Ernest, do you have a working definition of cancel culture?
Why, yes. In my book, The Case for Cancel Culture, I define cancel culture as when a person, and I'm very clear on that, a person chooses to cancel a person, place, or thing, which is a noun, or idea, that they find to be detrimental to their way of life. And that's very important, the detrimental to their way of life, because it's how they perceive it to be harmful to their life. It's not a matter of taste, right? So if you don't like a movie because the movie you didn't think it was funny, if you did not go to McDonald's hypothetically because you thought the food didn't taste good, that's not cancel culture. That's just a matter of taste. That's subjective. But if you have an actual reason for not supporting, let's say that McDonald's, not because the food didn't taste good, but you said, look, they don't pay their workers a livable wage, and you're taking a stance on that, that's cancel culture. Or if you say you didn't want to go to that movie, let's say you didn't want to support a Kevin Hart movie because of his history of homophobia, that's cancel culture. And I say this because cancel culture isn't, in my opinion, it's relative, it's subjective. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. Everyone cancels, right? For example, if you're Muslim and you don't eat pork, you're canceling pork for your religious, spiritual beliefs. You're entitled to that, and that's your viewpoint.
And you're going to argue with Jews about why you're right to cancel pork, but they're not.
Well, that's their entitlement, right? Okay. And so it's subjective in that way of how you choose to. Okay. And so it's important on that. So it's not a conservative thing. It's not a progressive thing. Everyone on both sides do it. Everyone does it, whether they like to acknowledge it or not. It's something that we all do. And that's how I neutralize it in my book.
Thank you. That's great. Rikki, in The Canceling of the American Mind, you talk about cancel culture. How do you define it?
So my co-author is a lawyer, so this is a little bit more of a legalistic
Well,
definition.
we didn't ask him. You're on the panel, right? And there's a reason for that, right?
Well, I'm going to deliver the quote, and then I'll explain a little bit. But we defined it as the uptick beginning around 2014 and accelerating in 2017 and after of campaigns to get people fired, disinvited, deplatformed, or otherwise punished for speech that is or would be protected by the First Amendment, and the climate of fear and conformity that has resulted from this uptick. So basically, we bring in 2014 and 2017 to kind of allude to the fact that social media very much did bring in cancel culture in a way that, just pointing your finger at someone before did not necessarily, but also the First Amendment standards being that, just because you say something that is not necessarily protected or you incite violence, like me bringing the law to the table is not cancel culture necessarily. But we would not necessarily say that you're canceling pork. Like, this is actually calling for somebody to lose their job or calling for actual destruction to their reputation or their career or their life in our definition.
Okay. Thank you. Dov?
Yeah, Nick.
Yeah.
I think I'm with Nick on most of that. I found Ernest's definition. Parts of it were interesting. Parts of it I found creative and far too generous. It's not pork. It's jamming up someone's life by way of your feelings. And sometimes your feelings are legit. You know, if you feel that you are in harm's way, for me, that would be an alternate definition. Mm-hmm. My experience of cancel culture is that somebody has a point of view or an opinion or says something, and you want to harm that person because it offends you, not because you're necessarily endangered by it. And I also think that it just diminishes our ability to communicate with one another, right? Mm-hmm. If I want to know, I'm half Jewish. If somebody said to me, why are there so many Jews in the media? Well, why can't we have that conversation as opposed to shutting them down immediately, and calling somebody an anti-Semite or a racist or whatever for having an observation about a people or a culture? You just diminish the human experience. You diminish three-dimensionality. Go ahead, Nick.
What's the other half?
The other half of what? A wasp.
Of you, yeah. I'm just curious.
Wasp. My mother's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Okay. So you guys, you could agree on hating the Catholics.
No, of course we could all agree on that. I'm not crazy,
Philadelphia has a great history of hating the Catholics.
I mean, listen, it's Okay. No, that's it. I don't have anything more to add.
Let's move to some examples to kind of tease out, what this means, and then maybe we can. And I guess before we go to examples, Ernest, would you agree that there is more cancel culture, however we're defining it now, than there was, say, Rikki in The Canceling of the American Mind talks about an uptick between 2014 to 2017 and beyond. Is it happening more or less? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. It's been since the beginning of time. In my book, I talk about how cancel culture really started at the beginning, arguably, depending on your religious faith, with Adam and Eve. It starts with the decision of you ate that apple, and we saw condemnation. We look at through history. In my book, I say we get caught up in words, right? Before it was cancel culture, it was call-out culture. Before it was call-out culture, it was political correctness. Before that, it was the Salem witch trials. It was the civil rights movement. It was McCarthyism, right? And there was various interpretations around what that looks like. I think what I will say is that the reason why certain demographics of people might be more critical about cancel culture is because they were doing most of the counseling without any pushback. The more democratic we were as a society, the more everyone else got a chance to counsel.
Okay, so you're saying that cancel culture is not a threat to free speech or free expression, it's an example of it.
It is a part of it. That's been more, the more people have gotten rights, the more people have kind of participate.
Is it happening more now because more people can participate in cultural conversation?
Visibly, yes.
Yeah.
I would say that. But I think what we're talking about is dissent, essentially. The ability to push back and dissent. And I think people who are not used to certain folks being able to now have a voice to say, that's not okay, that's offensive, that's a problem, they're now feeling it, and now they're trying to say 2014 versus any other time.
Yeah. Rikki, do you have a response to that?
I have a follow-up question to your definition, because I think we are talking about different things in a certain way. I'm definitely talking about like internet mobs and pile-ons, which are, I think you would maybe agree that the experience that someone has in the internet age is potentially different to the experience that someone might have when they're getting called out before that.
Well, I think what's important to note is that call-outs have been happening before social media. What we have to be clear about is that what some folks do is that they'll create systems and platforms to define where this behavior goes. But whether you have Twitter or X, there was Reddit. Before that, it was AOL. Before that, it was people on the streets. This level of frustration is going to happen and is going to express itself in various ways. It's just that we're now in the digital era where people are using social media to do it, but it's no different than prior to that. It's just that now more people are able to express themselves on these platforms and do it in that type of way. But before then, it was already happening. Like the Teletubbies were already getting boycotted. There was petitions online. There was 1 million moms that was complaining about certain LGBTQ content and was piling on that, calling up the FCC by the thousands and the millions to protest. This type of behavior was happening, whether it was on Twitter or X or whether it was on Facebook. This type of mob mentality and culture was already happening. We saw it with the Beatles in the 1960s for those who were alive. We've seen this fandom and this type of behavior take place throughout history. It's just that I think people, because it's on social media, they want to create a new fancy title for it. But this behavior, this sentiment, this ideology was in society long before social media came about.
Yeah, but not to this degree.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not true.
Well,
true to me.
Well, yeah, for you.
I can understand. White.
You said it, not I. You said it, not I.
That's what you meant, right?
I mean, it's not just that.
I would say because I'm wearing a jacket. Why?
No, it's because of the fact that because you're
what
straight.
What else could it have meant?
Because you're straight.
How do you know that?
Because
I like your shoes.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm saying. What I'm getting at is that what's important to note here is, and you bring this up as an interesting point, is that 50 years ago, if we can have a mature moment for like 5 seconds, I wouldn't be able to counter your arguments and be able to sit here and challenge you in the way that I'm now. You could then, you could now. I couldn't.
The Jews were discriminated against all over the world.
Yeah,
I agree.
Not 50
but
years ago,
but the point,
not
in this context. I said 50 years, not 500.
Okay.
And I think what's important to note is that you make a good point that now I do have a platform. Now I do have a book. And now, because of that,
and you have a jacket.
And I have a jacket.
Yeah.
You
nice
could say
jacket,
you could say all of those things a long time ago and not necessarily get the same amount of pushback that you get now. And so I understand for someone like yourself, you could feel even more frustrated because now you're experiencing something that has been a part of my experience and those of my ancestors for many, many years.
Yeah, that's not an argument for it.
But
I'm not.
Just a rationalization of it.
To narrow this slightly, Rikki, is that kind of public argument what you mean in your book and in your writing when you talk about cancel culture? You were talking in your definition, you were also talking about trying to get people fired or deplatformed in a way, which seems related but distinct from what Ernest is talking about. And I think it's true, and I think it's a good thing that there are more different types of viewpoints and types of people who are arguing now online and have access to public discourse. But I think you define cancel culture as something more than that.
Yeah, it's specifically calling for an actionable thing against somebody. It's saying that I want to destroy your reputation. I'm calling your boss. I'm writing to your place of work. I think that it's going beyond. I mean, I certainly don't think that disagreeing with you on Twitter is cancel culture. I think that people are very often very quick to say I'm being canceled when they're actually not. I mean, Vladimir Putin has said that he was, or his Secretary of Defense said that he was being canceled for invading Ukraine. I mean, people have used cancel culture in the most absurd examples.
Are very hurt.
But I also, Ernest, I want to go back to, before we move past the definitions, is it correct that, am I getting it right, that your definition is like when you want to cancel somebody because your way of, or your being is being, could you repeat your definition one more time?
So basically when you view a person, place, or thing as being a detriment to your way of life. So for example, it's interesting because when you brought up the part about canceling jobs, I think the Dixie Chicks in the early 2000s had many people trying to cancel their opportunities, their jobs before social media. Was that not cancel culture? I think that was. Paul Robeson, for those who know Philadelphia, his career was stifled as a black actor for speaking out against civil rights. I think Dalton Trumbo, McCarthyism, I think they were trying to get at him because they thought he was a communist.
But that's an argument.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that there were not assaults on free speech before.
But it's not. But it's not assaults on free speech. What I'm getting at is that there was a targeted attempt to, because they disagreed with their viewpoints, that they wanted to target their employment and ruin their reputations.
And so you're making the case for
that doesn't make it constructive.
Oh, I didn't say it was because
your book says it is.
No, my book says that it is not a wrong or right thing that everyone do it. I'm saying
two examples.
No.
Can I go back to the definition really quick though? Because
Rikki,
I do want to go back to the definition really quickly. When you use the word cancel in your definition of cancel culture, and so I'm still, when you use the word in the definition of the word, I'm not clear what the word means. So can you explain to me? No, but I actually, what does that actually mean to you? Like, and I'm not attacking you. But what does the word cancel mean?
I get that.
What is the action?
It can mean a variety of things. It's a sense of protest. It's an act of protest. You can not subscribe to something. You can boycott something. You can choose to tell people not to support it. It's just it's a complete dissolution of it. So, for example, I might say, I'm going to stop buying vapes. I don't vape. But if I said, I want to stop supporting vapes because it's bad for people's health, it's bad for the environment, and I don't want to vape. So I choose not to support it, or I might encourage other people not to.
Nobody would call that cancel.
Yeah, that's not
if
cancel
culture. If that's your
culture.
definition of cancel culture, then I'm fine with that.
But
to be clear,
then we shouldn't be here.
But let me finish. But we're talking about things, right? I'm talking about things. If I'm talking about a person that I feel like have a history, like, for example, Kanye West. Before Kanye West was anti-Semitic, he was a misogynist. He was a colorist, and I didn't wait for him.
Kanye is breaking all kinds of barriers.
No, but there were people.
He's
but
the
there
Michael
were.
Jordan of
That's fine,
racism, homophobia.
Right, but to be clear, for some people, the line was anti-Semitism.
Right.
For some of us, including myself, it was long before the anti-Semitism, and so there's varieties and variations of what people choose to counsel. My reason was when he started to align himself with Donald Trump, doing MAGA. Dismissing and denying slavery.
Wait, it's about cancel culture.
Right, but that's a part
you
of
have every right to not buy a record.
Yeah. No, but if I'm telling people not to support him,
right,
and he's lost contracts from Adidas and his reputation and jobs, and I was a part of that. That's a form of cancel culture. So my question to people who are talking about these reputations, can you clarify? What are the people that you're saying that are getting their reputations? What are they doing? Because maybe I would argue that some of this is warranted. Some of it may not be warranted. But I just want to be clear, what do you think isn't? Because if you think it's such a bad thing, do you think that the anti-Semite, the racist, the bigot shouldn't have those things canceled? Or what are we talking about here?
So can I just ask for a second, and maybe Rikki or Dov can answer this. If, let's say, Paul Robeson, or Paul Robeson, if you said publicly, Paul Robeson is a communist, and he was a supporter of Stalin's Soviet Union, and you merely talk that up and you say, you know what, I don't like that, so I'm not going to patronize him. Is that cancel culture in the same way as organizing a boycott to say he should not be allowed to perform here or there?
Yeah, that's the
elsewhere.
distinction.
I would say for sure the distinction.
And then, Rikki, could you talk, because I know your book pretty well, and like when you talked about the increase, I know you guys specifically point to the number of professors who have been attacked. Like, people are trying to say, not simply like, these academics have crazy ideas and they're wrong, but, campaigns to tell, to have universities fire professors. How does that kind of put a different, kind of force behind this idea of cancel culture?
Well, specifically, how do universities?
Yeah, or I mean, like, what is the you guys measure a kind of rising increase in the number of campaigns to fire people, not simply to call them out, but to cancel them?
Yeah, certainly university campuses were kind of like the petri dish where cancel culture, in our view or our definition, developed, and that took the form typically of a specific professor getting called out for something controversial that they said or did, people circulating petitions or calling out on social media for them to be fired or removed from their jobs. Oftentimes administrators capitulated, and that became a huge problem, but there was a large uptick around 2014 for the first time. Then again with the 2016 election, I think a lot of people kind of thought in that sort of lull period around 2017, 2018, that was in the rearview mirror, because 2016 was a very tense moment. And then 2020 came along and it all exploded again. I think this kind of like ebbs and flows in moments of cultural tension. But specifically, it's like really going for the jugular of, let's take this person down, let's get them fired, let's attack them even if they're a tenured professor. And that's not, in my opinion, a healthy way to debate their ideas. I mean, would it not be better to have, in your view, Ernest, a conversation with someone, or to write a very pointed op-ed in the student paper? Or do you think that calling for someone to be fired for a view, especially because I think, in my view, oftentimes the fact that professors can, even if it's a very old opinion, the more they apologize, the worse it actually gets. I don't think that people are actually looking for them to say, I disavow this view, it's an old opinion of mine, or I'm so sorry, that was poorly worded. I don't often think that those mobs of people that really get whipped up are really looking for someone to change their mind. I think that they're really just looking for a scalp on the wall.
Ernest?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not going to have a conversation with a neo-Nazi. I'm not going to.
You prefer old school Nazis.
I'm not going to talk.
Yeah. No, I always wonder why neo-Nazi. You know, it's like.
Well, I mean, because we're talking about, we're acting like, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that in this current era that we're in with cancel culture, I think that that's the problem, is what are we tolerating? We're not getting any specificity on the line. We keep saying someone say something controversial. Well, what did they say that was controversial?
I prepared a couple of examples that might help us work through this. And there is one that was all aflame on Twitter or X today about, there was a guy who was on he was on a podcast with Mehdi Hassan, where he was debating him, and the guy who kept saying, like, I'm a Catholic and you disagree with me because I'm Catholic, and Mehdi Hassan was like, well, do you support the Nazi Holocaust? And the guy was saying, like, no, I'm a Catholic. I don't think people should be mean to people. But then it was on, and he self-identified as a fascist.
Correct.
And he got fired from his job, and now he's on a version of GoFundMe to help me, live my life, because I was canceled for saying I was, I'm a fascist. Is that cancel culture? A, and then B, is there anything wrong with that? Like, I don't know if I don't think I would, if one of my employees was saying, oh yeah, I'm a fascist, and the Nazis were, they were unseemly, but they had a lot of good ideas. I mean, like, unless you're working for Marge Schott and the Cincinnati Reds, it's like, no, this isn't working, right?
Right, and I would say that that's cancel culture, and I think that...
And it's a good thing.
I think in this situation, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing. But we've seen cancel culture, again, it's subjective. Some people might disagree with that. Some people who gave him the GoFundMe money that wanted to save him said that, oh, actually, we want him to stay lucrative, to maybe potentially act on his fascist ideas now that he has more spare time because he doesn't have a job. So I'm just thinking to myself, am I supposed to feel bad that he did get the platform to have the discourse?
Right.
He went on a major platform where millions of people got to see him share these ideas that we just needed to know. And he got the opportunity to spill his ideas. And, we live in a democracy. We live in a free commerce economy. And I think we forget about this part about, because it's funny, because the main people that are against cancel culture are also proponents of capitalism. And I say, well, if you think about free enterprise, right? Supply and demand, don't we get a choice to opt in what we want to and what we don't? Do I not have the right to, as a company or a reputation, a brand?
Okay, so, yeah.
No, hold on. But the point I'm saying is, if you're saying someone's job, right, they lose their job, whoever is the person who owns that company, they want someone to reflect their views. Do you not have the agency as a business owner to be able to have the choice to say, I don't want to hire someone who has fascist views in my company?
Yeah.
Well, of course, and
Rikki?
that's why in our definition we say campaigns to get people fired. I mean, you have freedom of association as a employer, of course. Like, and I'm not by any means saying that someone is compelled to employ a fascist. I would also make the argument, though, that it is actually helpful for someone like that to be on a debate forum, because if there are, is this a young guy? I didn't see the video.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are young people.
And also not that bright.
If there are young people that
I
have.
can't imagine he was a very good worker, but yeah.
I mean, if there are young people in this country that have views like that, I actually think it's a unfortunate but useful utility to know that and to hear them articulate it and to let them hang themselves with their words in that way. But I mean, I think the fact that, I mean, that's an exercise of the freedom of association of that employer.
But universities, you know, and I don't want to make a special exception for them, but the terms of employment can be a little bit different, right? Because you're supposed to have academic freedom and tenure, and you hire people with the understanding that they're not going to be punished for their views. And I'm thinking of, there was a Drexel professor in 2017 whose name, unfortunately, his middle name is very Italian, and despite my mother having been Italian, I cannot pronounce it, so I won't say his name. But he was a Drexel professor, and this got a lot of play, where he said at one point on Christmas, he tweeted saying, you know, I'm hoping for a white genocide. A couple months later, he made a bunch of anti-military type comments and things like that. And there was a strong campaign on Drexel, aimed at Drexel to get rid of him, to fire him. They held firm, and then he ultimately quit a year later, citing death threats. But, you know, Rikki, is that a situation where, you know, the terms of his employment, like, yeah, he should he be allowed to say whatever he wants because he's a university professor, or is academic freedom something different than being able to kind of mouth off on Twitter?
I do think that the university system does have a higher standard that they have to hold in terms of protecting First Amendment rights. I mean, obviously there should be a higher threshold in the hiring process than there is for, I don't know what this guy's job was, but they don't have the same sort of, especially with a public university, which is not the case in this situation, but I mean, they don't have the same sort of a contractual, in the Drexel case, they basically have a contractual agreement with their students and with their faculty to uphold First Amendment and academic freedom standards. And that's a different situation than you would have if you're like a small employer. It's a different kind of.
Dov,
let's get back to me.
Yeah, no. As a comedian, you know your terms of employment are that you never get in trouble for anything you say. But
listen, you know, I mean, I'm trying to think about the context of comedy and the difference between the cancel thing, right? There was Chappelle there was a whole movement to get right, and so it was
to get him
right?
to
Dave Chappelle,
right, and to end his association with Netflix.
Yes. And so to not buy a ticket, it's a perfectly reasonable choice. To engender a campaign to remove him from the ability to perform is a different consideration. And for me, that would be the DMZ. That would be more of a defining line, between cancel culture and allowing the free market to take its course. And in the context of a professor inciting violence, that would be the distinction.
Sure. Well, in violence and fighting words are different, right?
Yeah.
Because we're willing to. I think we all will agree.
But he didn't actually. He's not inciting a genocide. Like he was saying, like he wants a white genocide for Christmas. Like that's. It's not. That's not actionable. That's not an actionable.
What's going on? Did I not turn that on?
Thank you so much.
Nobody told me that till now.
I wanted to add two things to that. So earlier you had mentioned about letting the fascists talk, and so they can hang themselves in that situation. Wouldn't you argue that counseling would be them talking so much that they hung themselves? That at a certain point, how far do they go before they hang themselves? Like if you give them the platform and spaces, which that man did, the counseling came because of what he said. That's when he hung himself. That part. And then the other thing I wanted to add is that, you know, again, I think we're looking at a place of privilege, right? And some people about what they think is too far and what's not. Where you say, okay, this person, there's a reason why that person should be deplatformed because we know history. If you have a platform as massive as Dave Chappelle, which I think number one, he never really got canceled.
No, I'm not saying he was canceled.
No, I didn't say he was, but the comedians always make that argument. The most privileged of them all claim they're canceled.
They try.
They try. And
they try.
The mere attempt to do so has them shook to feel some
Dave
type of way.
Chappelle was not, and the Netflix CEO actually, against the wishes of many of his employees, he said, no, we're for free speech and creative expression.
But here's the irony about this, and I hope the audience is following this. For starters, let's get on Dave Chappelle real quick.
Dave is not white, by the way.
He's not. And that was never the point. You're hung
No,
up
we
on
started
that.
out going, well, you didn't have
Ernest,
a platform, and I had a platform.
Sure.
So Dave now has a platform, but you don't like what he had to say.
Well,
Correct?
as a person that's queer as well, I don't agree with his transphobia. It has nothing to do with the racial. It's called intersectionality. You can have one identity that doesn't speak to other.
Of course you can, but
Sure.
he has a platform, and now he has a right to speak.
What's the irony that you were
So
about to
hate
reveal?
speech, because you can speak, but you can also speak hatefully, and that's not the type of platforms that I support, regardless of race, gender, sexual.
But you call it hate. I'm not calling his act hate.
And that's the
A lot
point.
of other people don't call it hate.
And that's the point, right?
Yeah.
But we can live in a country where we can have different ideas and opinions.
Unless we're canceled.
And no one's canceled. So let me finish what I was saying.
Yep.
So with Dave Chappelle, right, he has a platform of millions of people that can watch what he say.
Yeah.
Transphobia. People can see and hear that. And that shapes and influences it. If you have a platform with a voice and a message, there's a reason why people will either want to censor it, cancel it, or whatever, because they know it can create influence. This man has millions of people that watch him. He makes certain jokes that dehumanize a certain group of people. That becomes a part of pop culture. That becomes a part of the conversation, and that shapes the way that people view other people. We know the importance of imagery in media.
But this is about
I'm a
whether or not
media
to cancel
professional,
them.
but the reality is that if I'm somebody who's trans or have trans family members, would I want someone to have a big, huge microphone to say and espouse these views? The same way I would not want someone to espouse anti-Semitism, right? We wouldn't want someone to do Islamophobic views. Yeah. It goes in that same category. So I think it's funny that people can cherry pick what communities they care about and what they think should be protected, because if it was somebody saying something else, would you not care the same? And so I think it's more a matter of privilege on impact. For you, transgender people, I guess the way that you view it, you don't think that's a problem. You don't care.
I didn't weigh in on that. That's
okay,
don't
Ernest,
presume to know my thoughts. I'm giving you an
you-
example of Chappelle,
but
who they tried to cancel.
You also, I'm assuming, you, even though you're half Jewish,
yes, sir,
and half WASP,
half WASP, baby.
But you are not
So
in
what?
favor. Well, the reason I'm asking is, like, are you in favor of, of canceling people who are anti-Semitic?
No. I want to hear what they have to say. Matter of fact, I think the worst we can do for, tolerance and the three-dimensionality of the human condition is to diminish the voice immediately because it frightened us a bit. And so, if I don't like what Ernest has to say, that doesn't mean I want him canceled. I want to understand the point of view.
Will you buy his book?
I may not, or I may.
Okay.
I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. But if Chappelle has a joke, right, and he feels a certain way about whatever subject, I want a comedian to be able to say that. Whether or not that comedian says something anti-Semitic, or has a racial observation, I think we diminish everyone's free speech if we can't engage in the discussion. And cancel culture, in my experience, attempts to squash the voice.
Let me follow up with that and ask two questions. First, is there a categorical difference? And as long as we're talking about comedians and whatnot, if we go back, 60 years now, I guess, and we think of somebody like Lenny Bruce, who was an envelope pushing comedian who had impeccable, what we would now call progressive values. He was always speaking out, often in vulgar terms, but always in favor of being more inclusive and giving more humanity to more groups of people, particularly marginalized people. He was canceled legally, where he could not perform in places like New York. I'm sure Philadelphia blocked him as well. Is that something different, and is that important? Like, do we all agree the idea of the government saying at some point, like, no, you cannot speak that, or you cannot publish that, you cannot think that or express it? Do we all agree that that's categorically bad?
I personally do, but I think what's important to know, like I've said before, is that the irony is that we are talking about cancel culture, and I wish we can evolve on it, is that those proponents who defend cancel culture or against cancel culture oftentimes do it to defend bad ideas. I don't ever hear people talk about what happened. Well, again, according to me, but this is my perspective, because your take is that you're against it. So my question is, what about Colin Kaepernick?
That's in our book, and
No,
we say that it's cancel culture,
Right,
and
no,
that's
right.
bad.
But I'm saying though, No, I don't. But I'm saying that the reality is, no, but let me finish. The reality I'm saying this is that oftentimes when we talk about situations that we argue are controversial, they're oftentimes more subjective to things that are debatable on harm. Versus, like, for example, someone standing up what they believe is racial justice versus transphobia versus something racist, and you're debating on how racist it is or how offensive it is. We don't talk about it in the sense of restorative justice in defense of marginalized communities versus against marginalized communities. It's always in defense of people suppressing communities that either you don't belong to or on the fringe of society, rather than actually defending and uplifting those respective communities.
Rikki, do you want to talk about Colin Kaepernick, because he is mentioned in your book, and
he's mentioned in my book as well.
Yeah, and I might add that in I think 2019 I wrote an article mentioning Colin Kaepernick, or when Donald Trump, I think in 2017, started saying, football players who do not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem should be fired, and they should never work in the NFL again. That's a form of cancel culture, right? And I think we're all against that, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and also Trump is dabbling in like governmental cancel culture in a whole bunch of ways that I'm against. But on that note, so Ernest, that's a form of cancel culture that you're opposed to. Like, where is your line of what? You're asking us what our threshold of acceptable speech is and who deserves to be canceled and who doesn't. Whereas I'm genuinely curious, if you're making the case for cancel culture, where is your personal line?
So to be clear, I support cancel culture as a tool. It's
for
not
everyone?
a perspective. It's not, to be
so
clear,
I can
it's not a perspective. I'm saying that what I've recognized throughout my interpretation of history and my lived experience is that oftentimes the people who are the most against cancel culture are people who are the most privileged or those who are in positions of power. History has shown that cancel culture actually, when done by people who have less power, the voiceless, the invisible, or the common everyday people, it is actually done more better than harm. That this whole myth of it's going to be this scary Oogie Boogie Man is often claimed by people who are proponents in positions of power, privilege. That those are the ones who are the most against it. And if everyday people wake up and recognize that if we actually do cancel and we do unify and do, go after, we oftentimes do it. Look, a tool is subjective, right? Like free speech is subjective. You're going to hear some things you like. You're going to hear some things you don't like. It's like a knife. Sometimes it's going to be a tool that's going to spread and do good things, or it can be weaponized. I do believe that critiques on cancel culture in many ways are weaponized that oftentimes protect the most privileged, wealthiest, and most powerful individuals compared to everyday folks.
I think we actually live in a very unusual period of time where it's the minority groups targeting people in power, and that's a positive, that's a democratic possibility in this point in time. But I would argue that the majority of human history is people of power crushing the people below them. And we're fortunate to live in the very small sliver of human history where that's not the case.
Well, can I ask as a kind of general question, and maybe start with Dov on this?
Yes.
Weirdly,
I was canceled by way of this mic. If mine hadn't been working, and theirs they were working.
You're a technophobe,
That's called cancellation.
No, but it is interesting to pick up on this conversation. We talk. And going back 30 years or so, we talked about political correctness, then we were talking about wokeness more recently. But we're in an era of cancel culture, but it also seems at the same time there is more speech than ever. Do you agree with that, Dov? Or
everybody with a Twitter account thinks they have something to say. I would like to go back to a time where not everybody had a potential following. I mean,
but not in terms of viewpoint discrimination. You just want things to be a little
just shut
quieter.
up already.
But can you turn off social media or?
I do turn it off. I would sell more tickets if I turned it on more. But I don't know. I mean, it feels like a net negative to me. Everybody, I guess, has their own subjective experience of what it really means. For me, the aspect of it, marginalized or not marginalized, is that I don't want people to shut down your point of view. If you have a question about Jewish culture, I've heard, when I used to live near the Hasidic crew in Williamsburg, and people would go through there and could you imagine calling everybody an anti-Semite that asked questions about this extremely insular community? You would pressurize anti-Semitism as opposed to diminish it. So canceling Chappelle because he's made uncomfortable or his observations about the trans community, I don't think that rises to the bar of necessarily putting the trans community in danger. And so I would rather hear his point of view, whether or not I agree with it. Hence, my argument against cancel culture. Finally, my mic is working. We're back on, baby.
So
but this is the question I asked about power and agency. You're not trans. You don't get to decide for another community.
I didn't say decide.
I know you didn't, but I'm just saying that for you, it's okay for you to tolerate whatever form of disrespect to another community that you don't belong to.
I just gave an anti-Semitism observation.
Yes, but that's
don't
fine.
Just choose trans.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but that's what you've accepted.
I've accepted all of it.
But I'm saying that, but some people, from a position of where they are, that may not be it for them.
Right.
And I think
but
that
that's
the reality
responsibility.
It's always going to be individuals who have a level. Like the nuance never changes, no matter how many forums I've done this, whether I did it in Oxford Union when I had the debate in February, whether I did it when I was on my book tour. There's always going to be a barometer of tolerance based on the way in which your life is situated.
Yeah, but
and
that's
if you don't have
human.
No,
what's that have to do with
humanity is empathy.
To
have the empathy, to have the empathy to recognize that
This is
my
a
experience
Yeah.
is not yours.
Right.
And
That's
so
what I just said.
what is okay for you does not mean that you get to delegitimize or insult other people's tolerance of certain things.
Ernest, can I ask, though,
Sure.
in that sense, and I think you've set it up well, and I think Dov's response, also lays clear something of, when you say, okay, Dov's experience is not yours.
Right.
You're not trans, but you're queer?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So
I don't even know what
does
queer
that
means.
Well,
you can
talk to
educate
him and you
yourself.
can find out, but what
I did.
what
I still don't know what it
action
means.
does that give you to say what you said offends me? Does it give you a right to say more than that, or to explain why, or to say, this person is acting in a poor manner? But it doesn't. You're not calling for the erasure of Dov's speech rights or Dave Chappelle's speech rights or anybody.
What I'm saying is that it's not that difficult, right? The reality is that when people decide, if you decide to have any kind of conversation and discussion about other communities, if that feedback is negative, right? And let's be clear, Dave Chappelle did multiple series. Since we're going to keep staying on Dave Chappelle. Multiple series where he was told, hey, what you're saying is offensive. Many people in the community and that respective community said, hey, this is offensive. This is not right. Yeah. You know what he did? He doubled down.
That's why we love him.
He consistently, and that's why you love him, right?
That's why a lot of America loves him. And many people not my color, correct? Yeah. So?
Are you dead? That's a different panel discussion, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
But what I'm kind of hearing you say, and what I would extrapolate from it, is you have an experience, I have an experience, you have an experience, we all have an experience, and it's all very subjective, and our own lines about what is acceptable speech and what isn't is completely personal based on our own experiences or subjective views. And cancel culture is a useful tool, so we should just start whacking each other with it based on our own personal, vantage point?
I would argue that what is being dismissed here is that it takes a lot for everyday people, marginalized people, to use their voices to speak up and speak out. And we sometimes get caught up on just hyper-focusing on social media when it's bigger than that. When we think about Black Lives Matter and people speaking out against police brutality, the mere idea of people criticizing the way in which the police operates, how their lives were at risk for speaking out. When we think about Me Too, right, and we talk about people who have had a history of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, how hard it is for victims to speak out and call for determination, that there are people in positions of power to say, well, it wasn't that bad, or you're making this up, or you're being too dramatic, or you know what, that's life. Who are you to dictate how those people choose to organize? I think what's interesting is for those people that want to say what they want uncensored, for every action, there's a reaction. If you are going to be so worried about your reputation and your career, then think twice about what you say and be considerate about what you say. I am mindful as a meaningful adult that I am very thoughtful about the things that I say about communities I don't belong to, women, how I interact with women, how I interact with different communities. There is a culture where there have been men and other people for a long time who've never had to consider those things. There was not any regulations, policies around harassment, discrimination. They never had to consider those things. And what's happening now is that we're in a society where people, more diversity has encouraged people to say, you know what, you might need to think twice about how you touch people, talk to people, interact with people. And for some people, that's a cultural shock. And so I get that for you, you might have, not you, but others who've lived on this earth for decades, who've never had to check themselves, that now live in a world where they have to rethink what they have to do. Well, welcome to the modern era of living in a world with different people and understanding difference, that you might have to think twice about how you come across the people.
Let me follow up. So we've talked on individual levels and we've talked about the government level. At the institutional level, one of the things that has happened over the past, a couple of years really, and this, and I'm thinking of places like Harvard and some other corporations, but also colleges and universities that have now adopted a stance of institutional neutrality. So is this, it's clearly a response to debates over cancel culture and about whether or not universities or corporations or, affinity groups should weigh in on every issue of the day or not. And let's start with Dov and we'll work our way this way. Is that good for, is that good for a democratic culture where more people participate? Or is that a retreat from kind of principled speech?
Yeah, listen, I'm for more speech. I mean, I understand that, Ernest's perspective is his perspective, and he has a right to it. And so I don't want to cancel him because of his perspective. Right. And so I believe in his right to speak, whether or not I disagree with him. And so I believe in Chappelle's right to speak. I believe in the professor at Harvard that was pushed out because they said that biological men and women, they basically, something about male and female biology being distinct and didn't really acknowledge all of the nuance in the human spectrum. I believe they have a right to say what they want to say and without fearing for their career.
Is it good then that Harvard is now saying, and this really came out after October 7th,
right,
where they're like, hey, we're not going to weigh in on stuff that isn't directly related to the educational mission and research mission of Harvard.
If you want a dynamic educational institution and you shut down certain voices, then you develop an ideological sort of capture, so to speak. I mean, how can you have a dynamic, dynamic range of views if you're diminishing the views of the people that don't believe that there are 14 aspects of the fluidity of human gender? And so,
Rikki, how do you is a shift towards institutional neutrality a good thing for free speech, or is it problematic?
I think institutional neutrality is a positive, personally, because I think that when you have the institution speaking on high from administrators from behind like mahogany doors, making a statement on a contentious issue that people in the community might disagree on, that kind of sends a message that we all agree apparently, but some people within the community might disagree, or there might be nuance. And if it's not directly related to the interworkings of the university, or, I think it would be appropriate for a university to make a statement maybe about Trump's assaults on academic freedom recently. I would say that is something that does not necessarily require institutional neutrality right now, but something that's completely irrelevant to the day-to-day life of the actual university itself, I think leaves room for the institution to be made up of people that have opinions and not for the institution itself to have an opinion.
Ernest, what about you?
I think about L.A. Wiesell's thoughts on neutrality, and I'll just leave it there. I think that neutrality is, in many ways, in my belief system, Leonicide, the oppressor. And I think that, let's be clear, they're not doing it because they want to do it. They're doing it because they're being coerced to do it. It's not a choice that they're having. They have no agency in it. These institutions had stances that made them places that were spaces for some people to want to go. colleges and all ones have their own identities. I think trying to neutralize it is to try to act like every institution does not have its own unique identity, perspective, and that's why we choose the schools that we go to. But I also want to just push back on something around free speech. Words matter. Words have actions. And if we just treat it as, oh, someone said something and that's it, then we devalue the actual power of free speech. If you know your power, you know your platform or what you say, you know that it carries weight beyond just simple talk. Mein Kampf was not just words. It was a manifesto that led to millions of people being murdered and killed. But and if we don't, but I'm saying this to say, oh, I just want speech. I just want more free speech. I actually am very much selective on what kind of speech that I want to hear and what speech is okay, because not everything is. And I think as a society, we do have the right to debate those things, but there should be consequences. We're living in a society now where people feel like they can say whatever they want without any consequences or accountability. I think.
Do you really believe that? I mean, I
believe what?
That people act like I shouldn't be held, responsible.
There are enormous
for what
consequences.
I say. I mean,
but when people are so critical about the consequence they do get for the things they say, cancel culture is a consequence. It is a consequence that can happen based on what you say.
That doesn't make it right.
No, I didn't say it do, but if you're against cancel culture, then you're against the accountability metric to which that free speech is. Like, again, I'm very mindful of the things that I say, and I think the reality is that we oftentimes act like people are out here making mistakes. Where's the accountability for bad faith actors? There are actually people who are saying things. They are saying I'm a fascist. They are saying they're sexist. They are now coming out saying they're white supremacists and embracing it. I saw an interview on, I think, Piers Morgan, where a woman like blatantly said the N-word and said, yeah, I say the N-word.
I was not that woman in that.
Right, I remember that. I saw, and I'm on there, and I remember seeing that. And I'm just saying, like, if people want her to get fired, or people in her boss saw her on TV saying that, she should lose her job. If people saw that, they should. So
a lot of them do.
Yeah, but that's the point, though.
A lot of people have lost their jobs, so the consequences are real.
And they should. And that's what I'm encouraging.
So then what the hell are we arguing about?
But then we
it's a circle.
But then we're kind of evaluating each example on its own terms, because there are cases. There was a guy who was he had become the head of communications at Boeing, and literally 30 years before he accepted the job, he was in the military and had written in a journal, in an academic, an article in an academic journal, where he had said that women should not be in combat situations. Literally 30 years before, he had actually changed his position on that, which at the time he was writing was an overwhelmingly majority position. And he was canceled because of that article. And that seems, would we all agree that that's, it's an example of cancel culture, and cancel culture is kind of a technology. And that's just like a really bad use of cancel culture.
It's her horrendous use of cancel culture.
Right. No, but I want to answer that. So here's what I say in my book, and I think this is what I think this.
And your book's title?
The Case for Cancel Culture.
Okay. Yeah.
I think what's important to note, though, and I think what gets lost in these conversations, is that we're asking for perfection in this in a way that we don't ask for in any other institutions or systems. The criminal justice system is flawed. Policing in this country is flawed.
Every system is flawed.
Right, but one would argue, because I want to land on this, is that when you talk about policing, right, there are a lot of people who, most Americans would argue that abolishing the police is not what we want to do. But I could argue that if you gave a bunch of individual cases of, tons of cases of police impropriety within policing, you would be persuaded enough to think, maybe there should be something wrong with it, right? But you still believe at the end of the day that it might be.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm talking about policing.
What about it?
I'm saying that people are having those questions about whether or not it should be abolished or not.
What
right?
does that have to do with cancel culture?
I'm getting to that. What I'm getting to is that there's a flawedness, and I think it's interesting how I'm getting talked over when making a point.
You're talking endlessly. You've had more airtime than everybody here.
Sure.
I mean, you talk 5 times as much as everybody here.
Hold on, but I think it's funny because I want to say this. You want
more
free speech.
Stop commenting on the process.
Right.
What's your point?
I'm trying to focus here. What I'm landing on is that the criminal justice system is flawed, but people still defend it. Council culture, in my opinion, is something that it's not perfect, and we need to stop looking for perfection for it. But what I do believe is a tool within free speech and democracy that does yield results that are important, and they do yield more benefits to everyday people and marginalized people. And that's why I defend it. It's not always good. Some people do act out of it, do weaponize it. But at the end of the day, I think that when you look throughout history, it has done more for democracy and free speech than what we are oftentimes hearing from those in positions of privilege and power. That's it.
Okay. Let's turn to audience Q&A. Are we going to have a microphone? Why don't we... Well, let's start at the front and move back. Yeah, the panelists don't need microphones, but... I'm going to start with somebody I know. So remember, ask a question, and you can say who you are or not. It doesn't matter, but sir.
Hi, I'm Thomas Chatterton-Williams. I'm really interested in this debate. Thank you, everybody, for such...
we don't need that. Thank you, though.
No,
I
but
appreciate
I just wanted to be polite.
No, you are
this man is an author.
You are well behaved and all that, but just ask a question.
It was an edifying conversation. Yeah. First, a quick observation. I think there's a kind of negative equality and a positive equality. My dad grew up under segregation in Texas, and I think that reducing every American to the level of precarity that my father enjoyed prior to 1965 is not the type of equality that I would like to fight for. Second, a question, and mostly directed to Ernest, and that's the idea that cancel culture is often not about a mob coming to attack somebody who's transgressed a norm that everybody agrees on or a law that's on the books, but it's often picking somebody out of obscurity, even if it's a celebrity. It's often also picking someone out of obscurity to make a point about a norm that's still contested. So you could talk about pronouns or something else that has not yet been agreed upon. And so somebody transgresses something in a way in which nobody has a consensus that it's actually a transgression. They're punished, and then it has a chilling onlooker effect in which it tries to trump the kind of debate about whether we want to get to the end point that the cancelers are trying to get to.
Can you give a quick example?
So the quick,
of a concrete example?
well, pronouns or something like that. You know, like making an older generation not being up on the newest kind of manners about how to anticipate somebody's pronoun preferences, or an older professor using at USC, I believe, or it might be UCLA, using a kind of an expression in a Chinese class that sounded like the N-word and being canceled because you should anticipate that could be offensive to the...
1,000%. I wish I would have
So
articulated.
my question is essentially, what do you think about people that are punished, and there are many examples of this in the past 10 years, people who are punished for norms that are not yet solidified? Should there be some grace?
Okay.
I think grace is important, but I also think we got to consider the person being harmed. I think we spend so much time trying to defend the person who did the affliction rather than the afflicted. And I think that it depends on the scale of which those people are afflicted. You went somewhere, you said the N-word by accident. If there was a room of black people that's offended by that, I think that to a certain extent, I'm more concerned about that larger mass of people that was impacted, because impact trumps intention. And I think sometimes we miss that in reality, is that impact trumps intention. You hit somebody in a car, and what do? Do you get out the car and say, I didn't mean to hit you? Or is the person bleeding needs to get the attention?
Wait, but that's a big leap
false positive.
to say that.
But I think it's a big leap to act like everyone's getting canceled.
Is equivalent to running
but
somebody
no,
over
what
with
I'm
a
saying
car,
is I think it is actually egregious to try to act like there's so many, that mass scale cancel culture as we know it is based on people making mistakes on racial slurs or pronouns.
It's like there are examples.
There are examples where people, like I just said, do that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying
Rikki,
it's equal.
did you have something to say? Or okay.
Rikki, you want the mic?
No. All right, let's go to the next question. How about right up here?
Hi, I'm Heather Blakesley from Root Quarterly Magazine. And my question is really about the culture aspect of this. And Rikki, this might be for you because I think there's some pretty stark generational divides here. My concern is not even a lot of what you guys have talked about here. It's the people that no one have heard about. It's the people that own the small theater company, the this, the that, the artists, the writers, the creatives.
The dreamers.
Yes. So, for instance, and I'll give you a concrete example, there are people who would like to who would have liked to cancel my friend Lincoln, who owns a ballet company in LA. Okay.
Lincoln Jones.
Right, and
Okay, why did they want to?
Because he wouldn't post the black square.
Okay.
Right? So this is not about something he did. This is not about something he said. He had very, very good reasons for not doing that, including that he did not want to speak for all of his dancers. It kind of gets to the institutional neutrality point, right? But what about the culture that is being created by thinking that everybody who doesn't do or say everything that you would like them to do or say now deserves to have his entire career canceled?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that 2020 was definitely, in my view, the worst of that because everyone was locked down and had nothing to do but like scrutinize whose Instagram they knew had the black square or didn't. That was something that I definitely saw. I was in college at the time and I saw that very much was like a dividing line in terms of like the social lines. But I would say on the cultural level too, my biggest concern when I was writing this book was the young kids who were growing up in the cancel culture era, or with the sense that everything that you tweet or every Instagram post that's existed since I've had an iPhone since I was 10, like I don't even know the breadth of my digital footprint because I can't even imagine accounts that I've forgotten about that exist out there. And I think that there is a sense for young people who have this trail behind them and who've definitely said stupid things because every teenager does, and anyone who says that they haven't is lying. Like growing up under that sort of cloud is a really censorious and nasty thing, and you're always looking over your shoulder and you can't really experiment or try out this sort of viewpoint or idea and realize that that's not actually for you and you don't really believe that, and then retreat from it and end up at a totally different conclusion when you're an adult. And I think for me the biggest issue with the cultural sense is, what does it mean to grow up under that cloud of cancel culture? And I think certainly to your point, that moment of conformity really solidified it in the lockdown for a lot of young people.
Well, in that, there was the case, I think it was the editor of Teen Vogue, an incoming editor of Teen Vogue who was African-American, who got canceled because of decade-old Facebook postings that were made fun of Asians and gays.
Yeah, and well, the thing that was, to me, really atrocious about that case was that Condé Nast was aware of those tweets when they hired her and still decided to hire her, but it was the mob getting upset about it and advertisers pulling out over that, which caused them to decide to hire her.
What is the response? And maybe everybody can weigh in if they want to, but you said, okay, so it's hard growing up under that because you're not even sure what you said or didn't. Is there a statute of limitations on that, or is that a place for grace? Or do you weigh what people said when they were 12 or 15 or even 18 versus what they were saying when they're 25 or 30?
I mean, I think that's a moment for grace for sure. And I think there also is a statute of limitations, and we should listen to people when they say that I don't actually believe all the things that I believed 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And it's going to be really interesting when like Gen Z becomes politicians in the OPPA research. I think that we're really going to have something.
And interesting is in quotes.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
We're already seeing it now. I don't think we got to wait till that point, to be honest. I think we're seeing it now with how much Trump has been able to get away with, and certainly his supporters have. We don't have to wait to see that. But I also want to frame this in a sense of privilege and perspective with some of this. I feel like some of these fears are like first world problems, because as a young black man walking down this street and just even some situations being in rooms like this where I'm like one of the few, it can be uncomfortable. And what you say and how you carry, like you can't act a certain way on a panel because you get framed a certain type of way, and the fear of the canceling of that, right? Where people might be yelling at you on the side of a room and you really want to yell back, but if you yell back, you might be looked at a certain type of way.
Aren't you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
No,
But it's just the reality of it is that there's always, even in situations where people fear cancel culture, the cavalierness and the boldness to be able to act in certain ways and the privilege to do those things in certain spaces, that we don't acknowledge those things and see them. So council culture has been within my DNA before 2014. I graduated from college in 2014, but there's a group of people in this world, women included, and I think LGBTQ folks and others.
This is, I'll throw out, the hidden marker in American society that never gets discussed is class.
That's right.
So, privilege is more fluid than we tend to give it credit for. But thank you. Dov, do you have anything to add to that, or shall we?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of privilege being fluid, sure. I mean, if you grew up in Africa, they may look at people here in marginalized communities like they're enormously privileged. I mean, it's all a matter of perspective. Privilege is a word that's being thrown around as if it's monolithic. I grew up around check white people. I mean, there was no privilege. I mean, they may have gotten pulled over by the cops a little bit less. That's not a life of privilege. That's privilege in a very specific context. Right. And so, I feel like speech has got to be speech. We got to let it out there. And if we're shutting people down, like she said, like he said so articulately, and there are tripwires everywhere, it's a net negative for humanity. Yeah. That's my experience.
Okay. Another question? Let's get somebody over here.
Thank you. Sorry, was it for me? Hi, I'm Marina.
We'll come back.
I just want to get back onto everyday people because 2 examples. One was the Latino man that had his hand out the side of his car, doing the white supremacy, lost his job.
Oh, that almost certainly was a troll, right? I mean, he wasn't doing anything.
And it's really it's damning for people's livelihood for the rest of their life. The other one was the Free Press article about the high school student that, a couple years before, was doing a face mask with his friends. That photo went viral during, I think, the 2020. He had to move out of the state. He was kicked out of school, yada, yada, yada. Real lives affected, families affected, not anyone of power. Not a Kanye or a Chappelle, but these people have these stories that they carry with them for the rest of their lives, and always scared that someone's going to find out this horrible thing, but it really wasn't horrible.
And on top of that, with the internet too, when your name is attached to it and Google exists, sometimes things that are genuine mistakes or not even mistakes can follow you forever. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, can you not acknowledge that sometimes
I think that we're listening. I've noticed a pattern here. It's about context and historical context. When we think about 9/11, there was a lot of profiling of Muslim people on a higher level. And if we do not contextualize these things with a historical context and a lens, then we will make it seem like this is the definitive things to an entire thing that's been going on for a long period of time. So I want people to not harp on these moments. For example, there's a lot of people being called anti-Semitic right now. There's a lot of people being labeled that because of how heightened this current moment is in our political history. I'm just saying that outside of these what I call outlier situations, consistently through and through, cancel culture in those ways are not in those extremes outside of these boxed in moments, You could talk about McCarthyism, where everybody thought anybody who wore red or did something was a communist, and it was a red scare.
But you're not arguing that McCarthyism was a good thing.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying,
or that the blacklists in Hollywood.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that these moments, though, there are certain moments in historical context where you saw these moments where people got it wrong. When people got it wrong, and there was extremes.
Yeah, but can't we? I mean, part of the argument to push back against broad cancel culture or politicizing more things is to say, you know what, if we pull back a little bit and are a little bit more relaxed about the way people talk and engage in more conversation, that we'll have fewer mistakes of people who are wholly innocent and then get screwed over, or dark periods where blacklists are generated for whatever reason that catch a lot of people who are not even, the targets of what the action is.
But you're actually supporting my point, because I've always mentioned that cancel culture is a part of this free speech. And so if you are looking at this whole thing holistically, where was free speech at during those times in which you're naming? Outside of the cancel culture aspect, what also was happening during this moment in time historically? More protest, more boycotts. It was a heightened sense of free speech being activated in so many ways, where it was weaponized, manipulated, and everyone was doing it. So, of course, in those moments in history, cancel culture also takes a very wonky end too. Just like free speech did during that time. Everything gets heightened
what's good is that,
moments.
certainly since World War II, there has been more speech. More speech has been legal. More speech has been culturally viable. And that's better, I think.
Yeah.
Ricky, were you going to?
I would also make the case that the recent massive explosion of cancel culture on the left in like the 2015-ish and onwards era has caused a really nasty backlash on the right that we're seeing right now in this administration that is actually deporting students for their speech and attacking pollsters who come up with results that they don't like. And I think that it's not resulted in more free speech. It's actually resulted in a really nasty counter reaction that I'm completely opposed to, and I think has been a net negative for free speech.
I want you to really think about.
I have something to say. I've been platformed. There's no doubt that that's the case. This is an 80-20 issue. I'm not sure why we're even debating it. If we want to get into whether or not aspects of cancel culture have been positive in certain instances, I wouldn't argue that. By and large, it is a net negative, as evidenced by the people in this room who stood up and shared their experiences, as evidenced by everybody in this panel, with the exception perhaps of you. It's clearly diminishing everybody's right to communicate their experience. So I don't know how many circles we need to go around it.
Yeah.
Look at the room.
Nothing new is being said.
Look at the room.
I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it is kind of interesting, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the hat who's been raising his hand virtually the whole time. So, but Trump, when Donald Trump announced his presidency, first he talked about the Mexicans, and then he said, I'm not going to be politically correct. And it's like, in a way, to Ricky's point, I think it's wrong to say, the left is responsible for Donald Trump, but the idea that censoriousness was on the rise makes it more credible when you have somebody like Donald Trump, who is now going after law firms, who is going after media entities, who is weaponizing the FTC and the FCC to clamp down on speech that he does not like.
So when
right.
So basically, again, that's what I was trying to say earlier. Is like, is it because more marginalized folks that did not have this representation, this visibility, had a platform, got more visibility to then check folks that were in positions of power? So now we're getting a major, it's called American white lash is what they called it. And what we're seeing is this massive white lash that has happened as a response to the progress in this country. And you call it progress, right? Right, because I got rights. Yeah. No, but you're defining. But hold on. You're defining the progression of those individuals.
Okay, hold on.
Hold on.
Ernest, finish.
Right.
Ricky, were you gonna?
I was also gonna say I think when I see people that are canceling other people or are very loud or not spoken on social media, oftentimes I see a lot of very privileged white people purporting to speak for minorities or people that are downtrodden. I don't know that I actually think that the majority of people who are whipping up mobs against other people are actually from that group. I see a lot of very, very privileged white people that are pointing the finger at other people.
Well, then we can all agree white people are the problem, right? And that
Apparently.
Drexel should have made that professor emeritus. Let's go to, I think we have time for one more question. So
thank you so much.
You have been waiting. We have teed it up.
Thank you.
This is your,
and it's such a detailed question. And thank you. And it's for you, Ricky. So I'm 59 years old. In 1984, a book, The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom, came out. By all accounts, a conservative book. It called for sort of respecting a canon of classic literature and really not trusting the voices of students to determine their education and looking at a more, what we call a relativistic view of education. So I'm curious if the choice of title, The Canceling of the American Mind, does harken back to Alan Bloom and that conservative perspective, sort of gatekeeping, that tenured professors should get to make decisions about who's acceptable and who's not, et cetera. Or am I overreading the title and someone at your publishing house gave it to you?
So my co-author, before we wrote The Canceling of the American Mind, he co-authored The Coddling of the American Mind, which borrowed the title from The Closing of the American Mind, which he had me read before we wrote The Canceling of the American Mind. Wow. So yes, it does all make a full circle.
And do we know what the American mind is anymore? That seems presumptuous, that there is a singular American mind.
It's kind of more diverse.
I mean, that's the whole point, though. It is.
Yeah.
It's diverse.
All right. Well, let's. We got one final question way in the back row. The woman with the hand up. And this is the final question.
Okay, and I'll. I was just, since we've been talking about, I was wondering if you all could talk on media literacy and how we can actually begin to have conversations about this with folks in school or with your friends, or just really. I mean, I work in a public access.
Shut out on you. I know how that.
Yeah.
I work at Gillespie, our public access TV station. We're grounded in free speech, but we also have, ground rules for how we work together and how we create a space where everybody feels welcome to express themselves. So I'm just curious, like, what you all would be recommending parents, schools, colleagues to be doing in terms of educating themselves around media and specifically this issue.
All right. Thanks. That's great. Ernest, why don't we start with you and we'll work down to Dov?
Yeah.
So that Dov gets the last word.
Right.
Because he's. Yeah. No.
Yeah,
okay.
He's
Ernest,
deprived of
question
so much
of media
in his life.
literacy.
So I think one thing is important is that people need to diversify their perspectives in reading. As a journalist, as someone in the media spaces, I am on shows like Piers Morgan. I'm on Tommy Lauren next week. I am a professor. I was a professor at HBCU, a community college, so I'm with different students from different backgrounds and identities, and that shapes a lot of my perspectives when engaging with different students. I was born in Chicago, grew up in Houston, Texas, was the president of Future Farmers of America, and did dairy cow judging all throughout Texas. And then went to Philadelphia and went to college here. And my perspectives are shaped by lived experiences that often ground my perspective and empathy for other people. And I think the best ways to do that is to expose your kids, expose people to different perspectives. They don't have to agree with everything, because Lord knows I don't agree with a lot of people, but I put myself in these uncomfortable spaces that oftentimes people who would argue that my perspectives on council culture would not, actually lean into it, and I fight and I challenge. And I think we need to put people in environments that are different from theirs so they can be challenged and stimulated, but in ways that are productive and safe. And so I think that needs to happen. And you can't just close off and just having a view and say, oh, I think this way because I think this way. Do we have informed opinions? Are we having educated opinions and stances? Are we just doing what we're told versus what we know?
Thank you.
Yep.
Rikki?
I agree with all that. I would also say being aware of, especially in those formative years, your child's internet history and also what rabbit holes they're going down is something that is important. I can say that from lived experience, being somebody who grew up with YouTube. I definitely went very far to the left and then very far to the right when I was like 11 and 12 and 13, and I had a bunch of different political identities, and you should be aware of the ideas that your kid is grappling with and not defensive about them, but also engage with them and talk through those with them, and be aware of the fact that whatever they're clicking on, there's just a feedback loop, and that's positively reinforced constantly. And that's a new challenge that I don't think any generation before has really had to grapple with. And it's really something that can land you in a place that's completely alien to the people around you. And that's a really strange phenomenon that's going on right now.
Dov?
I'm serious.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see the mic. I don't have much to add. I agree with Ernest. I didn't want to. But
So you too wanted to be a future farmer of America?
No. I used to just dairy cows as well.
Yeah.
No. But listen, that of course we want to encourage people to spend time with other groups and increase the curiosity associated with that experience, which for me means diminishing any cancellation vibes around their experience. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've gone full circle.
So it's kind of there are no bad ideas, there are only bad people. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's, the media literacy question is a great one. And, one of the things that I think a lot about is everybody needs to, starting, at age 2 or whatever, you got to start developing your bullshit detector. And that's only going to increase. And it also means exposing yourself to ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, and ones that you do, but also like figuring out how do you double check what you're hearing about, and how do you test it out. And I think as a parent, it's too easy. Oftentimes parents check out because they don't understand the technology, or they get tired of their kids, and their kids feel there's a gulf. And it's really maintaining that continuity, but also kind of recognizing that if you're generally creating a space of intellectual curiosity and empathy and understanding and openness, it's going to work out pretty well, and that, the idea is, read more, think more, talk more. And I think that's a good note to end on, because we are at the National Liberty Museum, where, liberty is important to this institution. It's very important to the United States. Concepts of free speech and free discourse and open civil debate, which I think we modeled tonight. It was nice, fiery, passionate. I hope you will all join me in giving a round of applause to Dov Davidoff, Rikki Schlott, and Ernest Owens. Thank you all for coming out.
And thank you, Nick. That was nice work.
I'm going to take us home. A woman in the back that said media literacy. Thing to do is visit the National Liberty Museum. That's a part of what we do. As we wrap up, I promised fun, fiery, and a little uncomfortable, which I think we got. So kudos to us. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you, if you had a good time, please consider becoming a member on your way out. We have a couple of other programs coming up. Our next event is a third Thursday. If you haven't come, we actually had 4 comics the last time around. Every one is a different one. It's on August 21st. We also have our gala coming up. We will be switching this entire museum from the Year of Free Speech to the Year of Free Assembly. You're like, that's a part of the Constitution? No. But where does free assembly live? It's a part of the First Amendment, something that's overlooked, but leading up to the 2026 celebration of the semi-quincentennial of our country, more important than ever to gather and have these conversations. Last but not least, please, please come back. We're so thankful. Thank again to our moderator and panelists. Oh, and thank you. Ernest gets gold star. We will have both Rikki and Ernest's books for sale down in the shop. They're going to be signing their books, so we're going to let them sneak out really quickly. And then if you want to, please stop by the front desk and we'll get that sorted. Thank you all for... Oh, thank you all.